Initial reaction to your diagnosis?
Well, the whole diagnosis process went very quickly, which got me very nervous to start with. Go for a routine physical. The next day I get a call that says I need to go to see a hematologist. I see him a couple days later. He runs some tests. The next day he gets those test results back and passes me on to a cancer specialist. So that part happened really fast, which makes you very nervous and on edge. Once I went to the cancer specialist and we started through an initial consultation with him, we went from nervous to just scared. All of a sudden this took on a real, it was very real to me that all of a sudden this was something that could kill me, and do so pretty completely and pretty quickly.
So I'm here with Clayton Dana-Bashian, and can you please tell us your history with cancer?
Certainly, Trey. It began for me about a year ago now. I got a diagnosis from a routine physical that I went to my doctor's office. They did a blood test on me and realized that my red cells, my white cells, and my platelets were all at very low levels. I went to a hematologist who ran some more tests and passed me along to a cancer specialist, who then informed me that what I had was called myelodysplastic syndrome, MDS, and it was starting to change over into a type of leukemia called acute amyloidal, AML. The disease itself, if you think of your bone marrow as a factory, and it's all run on automation, and what it makes are blood cells inside your bone marrow. And we want it to be making healthy cells all the time. The red cells are what transport the oxygen in the food, and the whites are what fight off infection, and the platelets are the ones that are going to help with blood clotting. Well, my levels were all low, and what was the diagnosis of the MDS then indicated that my factory was making, it wasn't that it stopped making cells, it was making defective cells, cells that weren't working well. And it was starting to make more and more of those, and that's where you transition into the leukemia part.
Hi, I'm Katie Sellers. I'm a physician assistant at Texas Oncology Medical City, Dallas. I work with bone marrow transplant patients. Day to day I see patients, evaluate them, assess any current problems, develop treatment plans, prescribe medications, administer chemotherapy, and just take care of them.
What treatment did you undertake, and what were the side effects?
Well, this particular cancer is different than most cancers that people think of. Normally they think of things like tumors, that you undergo chemotherapy, radiation, even surgery to remove the cancer. In this case, we really can't remove what it is because it's my bone marrow, and I kind of like having my bones and what's inside them. So we have to work with what's there. So we're not really removing anything. We're trying to work on what's inside. So the treatment for this, and it's also important to note that there is no chemo or medicinal treatment for this. The only treatment that you can have to get you to a cure for this is to have what's called a stem cell transplant. And in that case, what happens is they will basically kill you from the inside out. If you think of your bone marrow as a factory and all of the machinery inside it making the blood cells, we have to replace all that machinery because it's making defective blood cells. So what they have to do is, this is the only chemo that's involved in this, is they hit me with lethal doses of chemo that kill, basically destroy all that machinery inside the factory. We keep the bones, but we kill out everything inside it. Then the stem cells, which come from a donor who has to be matching you at least 50%, would prefer it to be a relation, but you can have what's called an unrelated donor also. It's just if the genetics line up. In my case, my donor was my elder son, Mitchell, and he matched up about 75%. So what they do is they hit you with the chemo to destroy everything that's in there, and then a day later, that goes on for about a week, and then a day later they insert the new stem cells into your body. And it's really kind of miraculous because the stem cells themselves just go into your regular bloodstream, and then they find their way to your bone marrow, and if it's successful, which it has been so far in my case, the stem cells go into the bone marrow, they get the factory up and running again, and it takes a while, and you start making new blood. The blood that you're making is genetically your donors, and that's where you can run into some difficulty. They have a thing called graft versus host disease, GVHD, and this is where this new blood, if you will, is not getting along with your existing body. In my case, I've had some GVHD related to my liver and some to skin. Nothing real severe, but it's enough that I've noticed a couple of times. Most of that then requires some new drugs to take care of as well. Now, while your body is in the process of making all these new cells, you have to have red blood cells transfused into you and platelets transfused into you, because without those basic building blocks, you couldn't survive this at all. The immune system, however, has to regrow on its own, the white blood cells, because if I put somebody else's white blood cells in me, everything would be foreign to them, so they would attack the body and they'd kill you from the inside out. Just defending and thinking they're automatically doing what they're supposed to do. So through that process, the effects of it are you're just kind of worn out. You're trying to get all this stuff up and running again. So without an immune system, I have to be really careful about where I am out in public. Make sure I avoid people who have colds and flus. All my childhood immunizations are gone, so I have to start those over again at the 1-year anniversary of the transfusion, because they can't hit me with an immunization too quickly, or else I'll suffer from the effects of that particular disease. So it's kind of tough that way, all the precautions you have to take. For a while I had to be real careful about some of the types of food I ate and how carefully we wash things. I probably wash my hands more now in a day than most people do in a week, because everything everybody else touches, I have to make sure that I've kept it as far away from me as I can. It hasn't kept me from being out in public. You just have to be very conscientious about keeping track of where you are and who you're with. And for the most part, everybody who knows me and has recognized what the situation is, they've been very accommodating to my situation. It does strike some people a little strange the first time they'll meet me and they'll try and shake my hand, which normally I would do all the time, and now I do fist bumps and elbow taps a lot, and explain it to them, and everybody seems to understand that pretty well. And then the rest of the effects are just, you lose a lot of weight, because it's hard to be as physically active as you were.
So it's an emotional roller coaster. Like I said before, I mean, there's ups and downs and joys and devastation throughout the whole process. So emotionally, I mean, we get really close to our patients, and so there will be days where we're laughing and there's days that we're crying. How do we deal with it? We rely on our coworkers and our staff to just be a support system because we're all going through it together. Often some of us rely on faith, some of us rely on support groups or communities outside of the workplace to just grow and get insight from a worldly perspective. But we all kind of have our own little ways of dealing with it. And sometimes it's internalizing it, which we know is probably not healthy, but sometimes it's just best to let it soak in.
How has cancer affected your home life?
Well, with the home life, particularly the time I was in the hospital, I mean, it was very hard on everybody who was here, going between the hospital and here and trying to maintain the normal lifestyle that was going on here without Dad around was a bit of a trying time for my wife and my children. Not so much on me. I was in the hospital laying around watching television. Didn't bother me a whole lot. But yes, it weighed on me, the fact that I couldn't be doing those things that I would normally be doing as a father. I'm involved in a lot of other organizations and as well, such as the Boy Scouts and church, and helping out at school functions and things, and couldn't do any of those things while this was going on as well. But what I did learn is that being involved with all those other organizations created a support group that was really beneficial and really important to assist in getting things done with the family that I would normally do, that other people were then able to step in.
So what is the hardest part of being an oncologist physician assistant?
Patient loss, 100%. You walk through this, everybody hates the term journey, but you walk through this cancer journey with patients and you become close to them, not only physically, examining them and taking care of their body, but also emotionally, because this is an emotional process for them, and you see them at their best and you see them at their worst. So when we have patient loss, it is just, it's devastating. I mean, it hurts us and we rethink everything, and as the provider, we're thinking, what could we have done better? What could we have done differently? Not necessarily what went wrong, but what could we have done to help this patient survive? And sometimes there's not that answer. For example, I had a dear patient recently, had gone through a stem cell transplant, had for a diagnosis of leukemia, was doing wonderfully well after transplant, hiccups here and there as far as complications, but nothing that wasn't able to be managed. And he had returned to work on a part-time basis, was just really doing well performance status-wise, and he got a kind of common cold in the middle of the winter, and unfortunately that wound him up in the ICU. His heart started failing, his lungs started failing, his kidneys started failing, and this was a guy who weeks earlier was walking around his neighborhood with his wife, was back to work on a part-time basis, and to see somebody go downhill so quickly from a virus and everyday cough or cold was just so heartbreaking. And he ended up losing his battle, and it was something that wasn't even related to his cancer. It was because of his immune system being renewed after a transplant. And that's, I think of him and I tear up daily when I think of his name and the journey I walked with him. And that's, sometimes it's just not fair, and you wish you could go back and put him in a glass ball and just protect them from the world, but that's not always possible. So I think patient loss is definitely the hardest part of the job.
Do you ever blame yourself for it?
I think it's human nature to automatically blame yourself, or at least rethink all the steps that you did in taking care of them. I think it's kind of part of the healing process to, again, internalize it, criticize yourself, make sure that you did nothing medically wrong. But yeah, there's a component to it that I think every patient loss, we analyze how we contributed to ultimately their death. So yeah, it's hard to be hard on yourself, especially when you're dealing with such a heavy weighted issue like death. But to grow and move forward and to be a better provider, you have to rethink every step that you've taken. So yeah, you blame yourself and you learn to deal with that.
So based on where you are now, what do you see for your planned recovery in the future?
Well, I started back to work on a part-time basis about a little over a month ago. So I was away from work for 9 months. I started back to work part-time, and I've been slowly increasing the number of hours per day and the number of days of the week that I've been working, with the intent to go back to full-time. Probably it'll take me about 2 months to ramp it back up to full-time. And then after that, as far as my physical fitness, I have every intention of returning to where I was before, where I was running anywhere from 3 to 5 miles a day and working out in the gym, going camping. I like to spend a lot of time outdoors, doing things with my family. The doctor has indicated all along that the only real limitations I have from a physical standpoint are what I have self-diagnosed that way. So that, for instance, after the bout of GVHD that I had, and that really slowed me down, I would take a shower and then I would have to sit down for a couple of hours to recover, because I've learned that whatever you do, it takes a certain amount of energy, and if there's not much gas in the tank, you can't go very far. So that a lot of things people take for granted, like taking a shower, and you just take the shower and move on from there, and I was slowed down dramatically after doing that. So everything is getting back up to speed, and I anticipate being able to resume the lifestyle I had before.
So what is the most rewarding part about this job?
I think the success stories and the long-term patient care we're able to provide, patients that have gone through chemotherapy and bone marrow transplant that are 2, 3, 5, 10 years out from their treatment. I think that's the most rewarding part of the journey, because you get to see where they were and what they've become, and most of the time it's for the better, with a renewed sense of self, with a renewed sense of the world, with a renewed sense of wanting to give back. And I think that's probably the most rewarding, is that this journey is not just to cure the cancer, but a lot of times it cures the heart, and that's just like the coolest thing to watch. And then to follow, these patients and their families just as they go back out into the world and aren't confined to the oncology office, and they're able to go back to work and attend soccer games for their kiddos. And that's just the coolest, that's the most reward. I mean, to just see them having joy again and not to be burdened by cancer is definitely the best part about this job. I have been really fortunate to participate in a lot of Leukemia and Lymphoma Society walks and fundraisers, and a lot of times our patients come out for those because those have benefited them in the past. And to be able to walk alongside these people that once were confined to a wheelchair or a walker and couldn't move because they were in so much pain, to see them walking, whether it's a quarter of a mile or a mile, with a smile on their face and supporting other patients going through this, I mean, that's exactly what it's all about. When it comes down to it, if we can not only treat the diagnosis but also treat the person, that's the best thing about this job.
So close this time, I can feel your heartbeat. You're always on my mind. Where's my love? Please take my heart. I give my all just to be a part of you. Imagining you here is never enough. You say you gave your heart, but you only took my